If you are locked down or in the land of the free, this is always a last line of defence when it comes to common sense. We call it Paul Murray Live each and every night, conveniently named after the fact that we're live on TV. All right, now, to join us to discuss what you've just heard from the Prime Minister and the events today, including lockdown in Victoria, well, people that are currently housebound right now in the beautiful Greater Sydney region, none other than life members and heroes of their own political parties and legends on a Thursday night. None other than Bromwell Bishop, Graham Richardson, both joining us now to talk about things. Richo, firstly, let's talk about the Victorian decision today before, if you've got any thoughts about what you just heard from the Prime Minister. Here is Daniel Andrews explaining that everyone needs to go to their room till Tuesday.
Nothing about the fact that this virus has travelled from Sydney is fair. You see up in New South Wales, on machines to help them breathe in Sydney. I can't control what happens and doesn't happen in New South Wales. I want to see things brought under control in Sydney. These cases started in New South Wales. In Sydney today.
Of course, he didn't want to blame the New South Wales government. But, Richo, the decision clearly here is, and you can decide it as either specious reasoning, excessive caution or whatever, but when Sydney has had the experience it has just had of recent weeks, I don't know that the rage is quite going to be there. I don't know whether there's a benefit of the doubt. I certainly think there's a level of relief that James Merlino isn't the one in charge and that at least Andrews was speaking directly today, and I say that as not a fan of the man.
Well, I think it's good to see Andrews there. And you notice that there's that old Sydney-Melbourne rivalry jumping in even to Andrews. They can't get over it in Melbourne, can they?
They love it, don't they? Now, also, can I just show here too, right? Now, again, like or dislike Daniel Andrews, I call him Chairman Dan. Not a fan, right, Bronwyn? But how's this for a level of messaging clarity versus muck, right? This is the clarity of who can work and who can't work from midnight tonight in Victoria from Daniel Andrews.
Nothing about this virus is fair. Nothing about the fact that this virus has travelled from Sydney is fair. That's just the reality we face. I apologise to all Victorians that this is necessary. But part of my job is not just making popular and easy decisions, it's doing what must be done. And at this stage, a statewide lockdown is what's put to me as essential by the public health experts. That may change though. We may be able to release, as we for instance get, hopefully, large numbers of negative tests. We'll be able to let thousands of people who are isolating out, and maybe we'll be able to let large parts of regional Victoria go back to something approaching normal. As soon as we can do that, we will.
Okay, let's try this the second time, which is Daniel Andrews defining an essential worker.
There's a list, and if you're on the list, you can go to work. If you're not, you can't.
And the health hazard in New South Wales not being able to answer what an essential worker is.
So if you have to go to a workplace to do your work, well, that is an allowed exemption. But I'd certainly want you to be talking to your employer, because if you work with your employer, it may be that there can be other arrangements in place. These days, most employers would have capacity in an office environment anyway to be able to facilitate you working at home. I stress that if you can have that discussion with your employer, that would be very helpful.
Chalk and cheese, right, Bronwyn? And I repeat, I'm not a fan of the government in Victoria.
Yeah, well, there's an old proverb, Paul. If you want a famine, give control of agriculture to the government and wait. And similarly, if you want to destroy small business, give control of your lives to a socialist and wait. And that's exactly what Chairman Dan is still doing. Up here in New South Wales, there is no bureaucratic list of what is an essential service. And the people who are screaming at the Premier today saying, oh, give us a list, do it like Victoria, don't give a damn about the lives and the jobs that people are allowed to remain in during this lockdown period, which is still, I am against lockdowns and the way it's done, but at least there are more people who are keeping their jobs and able to go to work and keep their families and keep their mortgage payments and keep things going. Now, by having some sort of bureaucratic list, you're in and you're out, that might satisfy some people, but it doesn't satisfy me, and it doesn't satisfy most people, I would think, who care about individual freedom. We're having our freedoms curtailed all the time. But my concern is that the virus is just one aspect of people's lives. There are thousands of people who are suffering mentally, who are suffering torment to the degree, and I know of one case fairly recently, which ended with that person taking their life. So it just can't be that the bureaucrats can say, well, we'll determine what the criteria will be for lockdowns. Another group of bureaucrats will determine who's allowed some freedom and who's not. I think we have to have some responsibility as individuals. Yes, I'm locked down. Yes, I'm complying with the rules, but there are lots of people who need to go to work.
Oh, absolutely. And again, Richo, the thing that does rancor with a lot of people right now is that there's only one form of death that apparently we all must prevent. This one form of death is Delta, is COVID. Yet, of course, the consequences of the financial hardship that people will go through while you try to treat one problem, they mightn't take their life tomorrow, but this might be the start of the straw being placed on that camel's back that eventually cracks in a few months' time. That's why it is so important to be proportionate, to not always reach for the sledgehammer. That's my view, but that's not even a philosophical one. It's sort of evidentiary based, that there are consequences that we won't get a daily press conference about when you decide to tell everyone that they can't go outside.
No, I mean, look, telling everyone they can't go outside is a pretty tall order, and one that is certainly not going to be completely obeyed. But that having been said, it's probably the order you have to make. I don't like the idea of laws or government decisions being made that can't be enforced. And this one can't be fully enforced. There's just, Melbourne's too big for you to be able to do that. So I think we've just got to hope that our authorities and the moves they're taking to lockdown is the way to go and will work. We don't know, we can't be sure, and neither can the people making the decisions. I mean, this is an old-fashioned punt. You just have to hope that number 5 in the 4th race does win.
Well, I mean, there are calculations being made all around the world. I mean, literally, 54 people died in the UK today, but they made the equation about the return to freedom. They've made the equation that that's an appropriate number of deaths on top of vaccinations and everything else. So, Bronwyn, what about what the Prime Minister just had to say and what you just heard in part? Anything stick out for you in that chat I had with him tonight?
Yeah, he's got a problem. He's got a problem with premiers who are just at each other's throats. You've got the Premier over there in Western Australia putting somebody in jail for breaching one of his orders. You've got the Premier in Western Australia denying access to Taiwanese performers or Christians in his own theatres. It's insane. We've got a gaggle of premiers and we haven't got federal control because they've been elevated to being his equal. Now, he's got a difficult task, and heaven forbid that we've got to make sure he stays there as Prime Minister, because you can bet that every one of those Labor premiers will be ganged up and spreading the line about everything would have been fine as long as the Prime Minister had done X, Y and Z. Because this is now not a medical problem, this is now a political problem. And we've just got to say that people have got to be able to have more rights back, and they've got to be acting sensibly and responsibly, but without this, in the case of Victoria, a 5th lockdown. People are just stressed beyond belief, and the anger is rising. You've only got to hear it on Talkback Radio when people ring up and they are angry, and that anger is going to build. And I'm afraid that at the end of the day, instead of putting it towards the premiers who have acted in this presumptuous way continually, that they'll direct it at the federal government and the Prime Minister. So he's got a very clear message he's got to get out, and that is that he does know that the rights of individuals are important. He will work to ensure that the premiers are reined in, and for heaven's sake, don't praise them when they do the wrong thing.
Richo, what do you think of the chat? Anything jump out to you?
Well, look, I mean, the thing that you've got to remember here is that you've got two things working against each other. You've got people who are absolutely determined to go to work, and they are going to spread this this disease, and yet you can't really stop them. And it's something that we're just going to have to face over the coming months. If you look around the world, no one has been able to handle it, so there's no reason to think that we will be uniquely wise on this. But that having been said, we can learn from what's happening around the rest of the world and do better than them. That's something we're certainly capable of doing. And let's just hope that we learn all of those lessons. But having learned them, we've got to have a population, a citizenry, that accepts the responsibility of sticking to the rules. And Australians can sometimes be a bit antsy about that. You know, we fancy ourselves as independent. We've got that old sort of Irish convict view of the world, and maybe that's just the wrong view at the moment.
All right, want to come on? All right, Bronwyn, rip in. Come on, let's go.
But we've lost that uppityness, as you called it, Graham. We've lost that. We won't be told what to do and have our freedoms taken away. That we're prepared to fight for things and be independent and be individuals. I am shocked at the way I have seen fear dominate the lives of so many Australians, and that fear is pumped out by those premiers at those conferences every day for an hour or whatever it is. Perhaps we should say you stay home and you conduct your conferences on Zoom, and no more cheering journos out there to make it lively television and a promotion for yourselves. Start thinking about the people first, and not the fact that you're going to be there free advertising for an hour each day.
Yeah, Richo, last say.
But the premiers are only acting on medical advice. That's all they can do. There's no other way for them.
I'm sorry, they take advice, then they
you can
have
sack
to weigh
the
it up
doctors
and
if
make
you
a
like,
decision.
but that doesn't seem to me to be sensible.
When they're dictated to they allow themselves to say it's all the decision of this particular person who holds this particular job, as distinct from half a dozen or a dozen other medical voices that seem to pop up all the time, and they've all got something different to say. So at the end of the day, the responsibility of government is to govern. That means you hear the advice, you weigh it up, and then you make a decision, not just accept it for what it is.
So
the problem with doctors is you always get a second opinion.
Exactly.
and that makes it hard to stick with the first.